Wow. This one really got out of hand. I'm sorry. This one got really long, but not a lot. I won't take you that long. I'm just going to ask you, as I've in the past, please take some breaks. You can't. It's 2 hours and 32 minutes. Yeah, it's 2 hours and 32 minutes, and that's a long time to sit. So you may want to break this into three. And I say you're not going to have a lot of inputs, but it's all going to be important stuff for the test, and that you know. The first part's really kind of fun about organizing schools, and I think you'll relate to that. But when we get to paying it, it gets a little clumsy and cumbersome. And the thing is, this is the only place you're ever going to hear this formally. From here on, you'll have to educate yourself in these areas. So this is the one shot to understand the politics of paying and organizing schools and stuff. From here on, it'll just be anecdotal stuff. So here it is. It's long. I'm sorry, I rant and rave a bunch in here as usual, maybe more than normal, but nonetheless, it came out to be quite long. Too long to do all in one setting, so go ahead and make sure you take some breaks and get a drink of water or something, or a cup of coffee, and move around that way. Chapter 9, Organizing and Paying for Education. Organizing and paying. And glad to have you aboard and helping us pay for this education. As you finish, you'll get out there. Let me just tell you where we're going. This is a long one. It's a big one. The first part will be about the organization and finances of the school district, and some that'll be familiar to you, but will be a refresher. And then how the schools are organized, who does what, and then the state government's involved. And this is a big one, is how to pay for it. And this is probably the most controversial. And this, the federal government's role, even though it's not provided for in the Constitution, the federal government will really control the schools completely in the near future. And then, of course, with that is the politics of accountability. And what's so interesting, on this chapter in the textbook, on the very first front cover of this chapter on organizing and paying, what do you see? What are they doing here? Well, it's what a community organizer would do, and what they would call is they're protesting something, a stand-in or something. So here's a group of teachers. You presume are teachers. Often the folks that do this are not teachers, but are paid to be to fill in for the teachers. But you can see from their signs that they're protesting something. And so it's very interesting. And what's really interesting, it's Detroit Federation of Teachers, the American Federations of Teachers, which we studied a little bit earlier, but from Detroit. And Detroit is the most bankrupt city in the country, and is currently having hearings on this. So it's very interesting. That would be their choice to represent this on paying for education, is the most broke city in the country, the teachers union, demonstrating for more support for public education. So not sure that was their best choice. So starts out in chapter 9. Have you ever thought about the size of public education? It's large. For example, fall of 11, 49 million students, 99,000 public schools. That represents $525 billion. Yes, those are big numbers. Okay, 49 million students, I draw this out, and 99,000 public schools, not districts, schools, and $525 billion spent on a way to $500 billion. So we're talking big money, big numbers. Okay. Major challenge is how to best organize that large of a system so that's effective. So it's efficient and effective right here. And that is the ongoing thing. And what I think is added to the challenge is that only recently have we introduced any competition into this. That for the long time that was kind of a side note, is efficient and effective, because there was no competition like there is in normal other institutions. So in addition, necessary funds to be found, they must be spent wisely, because hopefully there's people watching how they're spending. The result, schools, taxes, spending, school efficiencies, and accountability accountability, and how the money is spent are hot topics. And examining each of these topics and making decisions about them is a complex process, addressed through politics for the most part. Sufficient funds from the various sources support schools. Teachers are just only one part of a very large, complex educational system. And it has involved all levels of government. Historically, this part here, the U.S. Constitution does not address education. It doesn't mention it. That was always intended for whom? The states to educate their own people. That's what's so perplexing to me, is the federal government taking over our schools. And primary authority responsibility for schools has been given to the states. Let me highlight there. It should be completely a state thing. And through, as you'll see, Common Core, No Child Left Behind, unfettered numbers of federal initiatives has taken the power away. And the biggest thing the government's feds have is money. And as you know, our schools will do just about anything for money. I say at times we're like prostitutes. If there's money involved, we'll do things. Even if we don't like them, we don't believe in them, if there's money, we'll do it. How about here? However, in the past 60 years, the federal government has become directly involved. The No Child Left Behind statute passed in 2001 is a clear example of this increasing federalism, and that's a term that used when the federal government takes over, whether it's healthcare, schools, energy, food. It's called federalism. Okay, it's likely that the role of the federal government will continue to increase. So if you like the federal government and you're going to be a teacher, you're going to love it, because they're going to be your big brother and right in the classroom with you. If you don't like involvement in the federal government, this is going to get a little contentious here as we go forward. One of the things that's so interesting is the current administration assured the teachers and the schools that one of the first things that would happen would be, when they were elected, that they'd overturn No Child Left Behind. And of course that never happened, but what they did do was give waivers to certain states, well, based on the states standing with this administration. So of course South Dakota did not get a waiver. Politics look closely linked. One consequence is that Huron teachers are more likely to receive pay increases by simply having more years of teaching experience. Public and political pressures are setting community expectations that any increase in salaries are tied to increase in performance in students, test scores, qualification of teachers, those types of things. And you knew that. I mean, that's how traditionally right now everybody's paid, just by the years of experience that you have, maybe advanced degrees, but often just for another year of experience we gave you more money. And there's no other place, certainly not even in my field, do we get increases just for being there another year. But in the public school sector, almost every place you go, just the fact that you teach year after year, you get a guaranteed increase each year, sometimes smaller than others. But I say you really can't name another sector of our economy where that happens that way. So that's the one blessing about being a teacher. Okay. So let's go to the organizing and financing part of this. It says public school may be located around the corner or a very long bus ride away. It depends where you live. I'm blessed to live in a place where my kids are a quarter of a mile from the middle school and a quarter of a mile from the high school. I wish I could say to you they walk every day, but especially my high school student, once you get to high school, you're too cool for school, so you certainly can't be walking. And I have to guide him every day as I give him a ride up there, that there's people that we drive by that have walked a lot farther than he would have to walk. But when you're a teenager, you're too cool for school, and you certainly can't be walking. Here's another part. Unless a community is a very small and remote, it is more than likely has organized a school district or a local education society or local education agency. I want to get that in your vocabulary, an LEA, because once you get away from here, that's a more common thing. And so I'm going to say this is our number one, and LEA, you put that in here and highlight that, what it is and what it stands for, because I say I got to get that into your vocabulary. But what it is, it's sometimes there's an umbrella group above your school district, especially if you're small, and so often the context of which you'll refer to those districts would be an LEA, a local education agency, and sometimes even local schools are referred to that. But just know that going forward is that will be part of the vocabulary in describing the schools. During 09-10, 1,629 districts were operating, and that's a lot of different districts, not schools, districts. These districts had many common features, but some different features. For example, some districts only have elementary schools and others only have secondary schools. One of the significant differences is size, and you don't have to know that. Here in South Dakota, we're well aware of this, but every state in the union is concerned about the same thing because the needs and the functionality are so different between very big schools and very small schools. I feel like I've been blessed because I have worked in both. I went to a very small school, I taught in a very small school, and then I taught in a very big school. In fact, I taught in the biggest school district in the state, the Sioux Falls School District. So I feel like I've run the gamut and can talk about the ups and downs of both. And as I said, I went to a very small school, and my kids go to very large schools. The middle school they attend currently has about 1,200 kids. The high school that they attend, it has about 2,400 kids. And so they see both, or I get to see both of those also. But here's that information that goes with that. What does that mean? Well, one of the significant differences, the largest school districts have about 45,000 students, right? 100 largest school districts have about 45,000 students in it, while some 2/3 of the schools have fewer than 2,500 students. So right there, think of that discrepancy between 45,000 in a district or 2,500. Another way to think of this statistic is that many smaller school districts serve fewer, 17% students, while the fewer in number of large schools have 83%. So let me take you back here and say what that looks like. And let's just draw the scale here into thirds. This top 1/3 represents 83% of the students, and these 2/3 only represent 17% of the students. That's why they're so different, and they function different, and everything is different about them. And this all comes from the Department of National Education. So as you know, that would make things very different, and how we're going to do that. So we size organization, they're very different that way. The school district is governed by a school board, not the school district. And again, it's going to push me to try and keep this separate, because when I make references throughout this chapter, it'll be different between a very small school and a very large school. And so please stay with me as I vacillate back and forth between those. But the school district is governed by a school board, not the superintendent, not the principal, but the school board. And they aren't run by those, they're governed. They're governed by that, just like a board runs a lot of big businesses. And it's day-to-day operations, okay? And they govern these. They don't actually implement the day-to-day things. They govern them. They're led by the superintendent, okay? So the superintendent is the go-between between the school board and the school district. In most districts, your official hiring as a teacher will be done by the superintendent. Okay, doesn't mean that they do the interviews and stuff. They do the official hiring, making a recommendation to the board. And so in a big district like Sioux Falls, you may never ever see or talk to the superintendent, but the superintendent ultimately would make the recommendation to the board that you be hired as a teacher. If you're in a very small school in South Dakota, you may very well not only apply to the superintendent may interview you and then make the recommendation to the board that hire you. It just depends on size and how many layers. So each district has a district office, and it's grammatically different between a school of a couple hundred kids and a school the size of the Sioux Falls School District. The central office, district office in Sioux Falls, is huge and employs a lot of people work there. And this that's district office array of administrative, instructional, financial, clerical support. As the state and federal government levels of federal government have become increasingly active in setting educational agendas, concomitant response has occurred at the district level in the form of ever increasing of the tasks must be accomplished. Typical school district organization presented in 9-1 reflects this and who's part of it. Okay, and I'll take a look at this. And let me, before we go to this, let me just talk a little bit more about some of these other ones, and then we'll take a look at the organizational chart. Again, it'd be different. All right, so local school boards. So we talked about the superintendent here, now the local school board of education. Let me jump back here. Governed by the school board, and the superintendent is doesn't run the governance of it. He or she, I say he, but there's got to be more, as many or more women running our schools. State vast legal authority to operate on the local board. School boards are normally elected. Board members may also be appointed by the mayor. Okay, so let's come back here. Legal authority to operate school district is given to local boards through state statutes. Okay, so here it is again. Let's go back. The federal government was given no authority by the Constitution to have anything to do with schools. It was strictly all left to the states. Okay, states now sanctioned local districts through school boards. So the authority to run the school is given to the school board from the state legislature. Okay? Someday you're going to have to know this. Someday somebody's going to ask you this. You want to explain it. Feds, even though the feds are running us now, they have no authority, even though they now tell us what to do. But traditionally from the Constitution, the authority was all given to the states to run their schools, to educate their populace, to educate their kids, and that authority from the state was given is given to the local schools through the school board, not the superintendent, school board. Statute prescribes specifically how school board members are to be chosen and what duties and responsibilities they have in the office. And of course, in South Dakota, like most states, it's through a populace election. We elect the school board members through a populace election. The statutes also specify the terms of the board of members, procedures for selecting those, duties of the officers, procedures for filling any vacancies, and local citizens serving the school board are called trustees or are agents of the state. Okay, did you know that? School board are trustees and agents of the state. And we don't use that term. We don't talk about that. That's not really how we speak, but that's exactly what it is. State says to the school, you organize and decide how you're going to pick these people, what the procedures will be. We'll leave that all to you, and we call that local control, which is really our federal government intended, that our schools would be, our states would educate our people, but the states would say to the local people from way back when is you go ahead and organize and decide how you're going to educate your kids. And this is what is so sad to me, that we're giving this up in the name of money to the federal government. Most school boards in the United States are elected by popular vote in special non-partisan elections, meaning you're not a Democrat, you're not a Republican, you're not a Libertarian, you're simply running for yourself, representing kids and stuff like that. And then which candidates are not associated with any political party, but in some cities, think of this, the mayor will appoint the board members. This percentage of appointed school boards is higher school districts enrolling 25,000 or more. That's generally where you can find that. So I just think of this, that a mayor would appoint the school board, yet even at 3/4 of these larger districts, the boards are elected. Usually teachers cannot be board members in their district, which they teach, but they could be in another district. Tend toward teachers becoming board members most likely results from the goal of professional associations to secure seats on school boards. So what we do, how we trying to get some control, or how this has been perpetrated, is that I would run for that district over there, and somebody from over there would run for this district over here, and hopefully we can have some control over that. And again, I'm not sure that was ever the intention of that. I don't think we see that a lot in South Dakota, but I do know several teachers that have served on school boards. I want to take you back here and see why that's such a big deal, but whether you're elected or appointed. They could be appointed by mayor. I say that's rare, but here's why this is important. Right here. When you're talking over a half a trillion dollars that are controlled by schools, you can see a little bit why there could be some corruption, and you would wince a little bit at being appointed someplace. And that's what they say in a big district, whether you're in charge of 45,000 students. That's the superintendent is more powerful than mayors in a lot of those big cities because of this, how much money that represents, and of course with that the chance for corruption and misspending and mischievousness of it. And for the most part, of course, these folks are honorable people and do an honorable job, but the courts have been clogged for years and years with prosecuting folks that have behaved badly in that role. So what are the powers and the duties of the school board? Well, here they are: to obtain revenue. Let me go back here. How it comes in here: obtain revenue, and mostly to keep an eye on it to see where it comes from. Their hands are a little tied. And same way with here, to maintain, again, they would set policy, but you can't imagine that a board member would be there cleaning the school. So they're responsible overall of making sure that this happens. And of course, same here. They purchase sites and work with buildings and stuff. And for the most part, they don't do this. They approve this. That if there's any money spent, all money spent in the district almost exclusively has to be approved by the school board. And same with materials and supplies. The board member isn't sitting down filling out the purchase orders. They are approving the purchases. Organize and provide programs of study. Same way, they approve it. Employ workers and regulate services. They approve that. Admit and assign pupils to schools to conduct control. Again, they approve the policies. And so it's a little misleading about this, that what they do is that they develop policy. That's what they do with all these things. They don't actually do anything here. They approve the policies. And how do these policies come to them? How does this come up for them to approve? It comes from the superintendent. The superintendent is that go-between between the two of them. Okay. Let me just a little bit more on superintendents. Some duties of the school boards are mandatory, where some are discretionary. Some duties cannot be delegated. For example, as a power to employ teachers, they must do this. Power cannot be delegated. In other words, they have to approve the hiring of anybody and of the firing. And they have to approve the resignation of anybody. Those are mandatory responsibilities to the superintendent. I should say to the school board. The superintendent brings that all up to them. Okay. Boards can be delegated can delegate much of this, like hiring process, to administrators. However, they act officially on administrative recommendations for employment. And then also discretionary power can be left to the board, is like whether to participate in non-required programs, for example, like programs of competitive athletics and stuff like that. They have some discretionary power over that, because some of that can be acted on by their hired officials, the superintendent. Okay. And then what does the superintendent do? Well, one of the primary duties of a local board is to select a chief executive officer. And so that's a term, and I believe that's on the test. You'll want to know that term, but they're known as the chief executive officer. That's their primary duty, is to select and hire that person. So when I say to you, how does the superintendent get their job? They're hired by the board. They're selected and hired by the board. And they are the chief executive officer, like the main guy from any big corporation. They're the main guy of the district. Now, in a very small schools, often this person may have many roles, correct? You may have came from a district where that superintendent was that and a principal, and possibly even the athletic director, or maybe had other hats. And I know there was one small district where the superintendent often drove the bus, because they were so small they had a hard time getting bus drivers. Okay. There's one notable exception to the general practice of selecting a superintendent by schools. In a few states, especially in the Southeast, some school districts hire theirs are elected by voters. And again, I want to take you back here. Why that's a little risky is this. Because it adds the chance of corruption because of the money that's involved. So just like in anything in politics now, it seems like if there's a vote to be bought, it's bought. And so that is that. Okay. But it could be elected by the voters, even though that's rare. I'm not sure where you'd go to find that. It's certainly here in South Dakota. By statute, this person is selected and hired by the school board. In either case, whether named by the board or elected, the superintendent is responsible for day-to-day operations, again, of the school district, not the school buildings. Okay, responding to interests of school board members, planning the district's budget, defining district's long-term aspirations. The superintendent is expected to be visible in the community because, again, it's like the president of a college. They are the face, and they're expected to be in that district and be visible and be the liaison, be the cheerleader, be the advocate for that district, to provide overall leadership for that district. So what do? They're elected, the superintendent, elected at times, even though this is rare, but for the most part, the board selects a superintendent who serves as that CEO. Okay, and then they respond to the school board. They are that go-between person. That's what they do. Okay. And I can remember I worked with one superintendent in a small school that did not want us to talk to the board. If there was any business to be done, that should come through him. And let me give you an example. In a small school, of course, you know the board members like you because they're your neighbors and stuff. And I wanted, remind you, this is 30 years ago, I wanted a wire welder in the shop that was not even new, and to be current with current practices, I felt I wanted a wire welder, and I had figured out some ways and some things to change around so that could happen, and I wanted to come to the board meeting and make a pitch for it. The superintendent, and visiting with him about how this is going to work, forbid me to talk to them and said, I will talk to them. You are not to talk to them. I'd never seen that before. I said, okay, whatever, that's fine. Well, the next day after the board meeting came back and told me they didn't approve it. They turned it down. Now you're wondering, what I'm wondering is what he said to them, because I was pretty sure I could have convinced them that I needed a wire welder. And I was only there a couple more years. I never did get one. But that was my experience with that, and that's why this person says they are the go-between. They respond to the board members, not you, the teacher. And if you were in a big district like Sioux Falls, that's not much of a problem. If you're in a very, very small district, that could be a big problem. Now, I don't know if that's everywhere. I don't know if other superintendents don't want you talking to their board members, but that just was so bizarre, especially after the welder was turned down. And then this plan the district's budget. And this, you don't know this, but when I was in grad school, my doctorate degree is actually in school administration. And what we were taught at that time, this is your biggest responsibility as a superintendent, is the money. Where the money comes, to not spend more than you have, to take care of all the needs, to be responsible for the money, and that everybody gets something, that things are funded, and you're looking for funding, and you know what you got, and you know where it goes, and you know how much is left, and you wanted to be the main person at all times that had a field. Now, of course, you have a business manager, for the most part, that could be an assistant superintendent, but you do not. This old professor would always say, you do not want that person to know more than you do about the budget and about spending. So he was so adamant about this, and he was an old retired superintendent. So you spend the money, the budget, and then long-term goals and aspirations, especially with building, hiring, growing, those kinds of things. That all falls in the lap of the superintendent also. And that's that overall look. And now this is where they're going, is this importance of leadership. importance of leadership in the superintendent board can be overemphasized, cannot be overemphasized. Districts influenced by leadership of the Board of Education and the superintendent provide. And I say the leadership of the board is only as good as the superintendent, because the strength of them and what they do comes from the superintendent, how much they communicate and stuff like that. So without that communication and support of high expectations by boards and SUPs, high quality education is not likely to be achieved. For example, offering curriculum programs that exceed state requirements is discretionary. For a school district to excel, the local authority boards and superintendent must convince their community that specific programs are both needed and desirable. That's what leadership looks like. That superintendent, and I maintain that the superintendent takes those leadership things to the board and says, this is what we need to do to have top quality things. These are the things we need to spend money on. These are the kinds of people we have to hire. These are the kinds of new programs we have to start. And these are the kinds of old programs we have to get rid of, or we have to enhance and embellish. So that's what this is. What's needed and what's desirable, and of course more so with that. Anytime we have those talks, we have to have this talk, the dollars that it's going to take to do it. Right? So line staff and staff relationships. And there's a question on the test about line staff. So dig in here and understand this terminology, because again, it's not a term that we always use. Even though it's very descriptive here what it is, if I would say to you line staff here, I'm not sure you'd have known what that is prior to this. Another important organizational concept to keep in mind is the difference between line and staff relationships. In any organization, some people will have the job of being executives, bosses, managers, or directors. Other people will be supervised by this person. The supervisor typically has the authority, at least some degree, to direct, monitor, and evaluate the work of the subordinate. When one person has that type of authority over another, it's called a line relationship. That somebody reports to you, how I was taught, we call it to report. I reported to the principal, but I also reported to a director of special education when I was in the middle school. So that was the line relationship. They had the responsibility to not only respond to me, but to evaluate me, direct me, and those types of things. When there is no formal supervisory authority of one person to another, they are considered staff relationships. So there's a difference between staff and line. Staff is, you don't have authority over me. Line relation is, you do. Okay, and this is our number 2. Here is you describe the difference between line and staff relationships. Right there. Okay. It goes on here a little more what those are. And then let's talk about central office staff. The superintendent of schools works with staff to carry out district programs of education. Although the size of staff varies from school to school, some kind of formal organization is necessary. Each school district will have the organizational chart similar to this one. In the organization chart, line officers hold the administrative powers that flow from the Board of Education down to the students. So that's the very top of the organizational chart is the school board, and at the very bottom of it is the students. And in between there is lots and lots of stuff. Superintendents, assistant superintendents, principals are line officers vested in authority over the people. Each person is directly responsible to the official above and must work through that person in dealing with higher official. The arrangement is frequently referred to as a chain of command, and you're somewhat familiar with that. That's not a new term, but in schools it might be a little confusing, and it was a little confusing when I was there because I said I had a principal in my building, but also I was responsible to people in central office on a number of different layers. So it was a little confusing, but for the most part it will not be. And you as a teacher in a school will be responsible to the principal, depending on the size of your school. Then there's administrative staff positions. They branch out and direct the flow of authority. Staff includes librarians, curriculum coordinators, staff developers, guidance officers, transportation officers, and all other people. And there's, in the bigger the school, the more there is, because in a small school, one person may wear lots of hats, have many different responsibilities. You get to a big school like Sioux Falls or a Minneapolis or a Chicago, there's tons and tons and tons and tons of administrative staff to do all the other things. And then they're responsible with their respective supervisors, but have no line authority over teachers. And so that's what makes it interesting. And some folks would argue that we have too many of these folks that don't teach kids, but they do not have line. And you know line from our other discussion. They assist and advise others using the special knowledge and abilities. Teachers are generally referred to as staff, even though they are in the direct flow of authority. And so that's what you would be considered as the teacher is staff. Okay. So that's central office staff. They do a lot. Okay. So what about expenditures? Well, 2/3 of a budget is instruction. So what is instruction? Let's see, at 12 and 12, that's $571 billion will be spent on schooling. This will be an average of $10,300 per pupil. And so I'm going to write that here, and I want you to put this in here. An average of 10,300, and what was it? 10,300, yes, per pupil. Okay, so that's the average, just $10,000 a pupil, and of that, 2/3 is for instruction. Okay. All this money will come from somewhere, including your taxes, and I, for the most part, denounce that, because it's almost exclusively from your taxes. They're just finding some new sources, but for the most part, whether it comes from the local people, the state government, or the federal government, it is your taxes. So that's what I'm saying, including your taxes. It comes from somewhere? No, it does come from your taxes. It must be allocated in ways that are equitable. And major expenditure categories are presented in this figure. As you would expect, the largest percentage, 2/3, is directed towards instruction. However, more than 1/3 of this is other components of it. School buses must be purchased and have drivers, district staff, administrators, federal governments about activities. School buildings have to be constructed, maintained, all those kinds of things. So that is how that comes out. Transportation and buildings, intermediates, which we're coming to now, of how this is. So when we talk about instruction, what does that mean? Well, what that means is teachers. It only has one meaning. Everything else other than teaching staff is considered something else. So 2/3 of the money goes to pay the teachers. So when we talk about saving money or more money for schools, for the most part, we're talking about paying teachers. And I think it's confusing, because so often we talk about the poor kids aren't going to get their lunch, they're going to get their ride, while 2/3 is to pay teachers. And the 1/3 is to do these other things. I'm not sure that's all people understand that. When we talk about, so when budgets are cut, the first thing we assume is that, for example, when there was going to be a cut in this district, they told the kids at school there wouldn't be any middle school sports. If the cut went through, all middle school sports would be gone. And of course, it made my oldest son cry. He was devastated that he'd waited so long to play basketball and stuff in middle school. And of course, the cuts went through and sports went on. So in my opinion, it was a very dishonest and distrustful thing to tell kids, but that's what they did. And they told the kids to go home and urge your parents to call the legislators and beg them not to make these cuts. The cuts were made and the sports never left, and therefore it it changed the way I felt about my school and the way they did things. There, I said it. So the next part is this intermediate units, and for the most part, we're not familiar with this in South Dakota. So what is an intermediate unit? One other type of organization that you as a teacher should know about is the intermediate unit. These organizations function between the State Department of Ed and your local school. They may be organized by county or represented by a consortium of other districts. These units may have different names in different states. For example, in some states such as New York and Colorado, they are called BOCES, the Boards of Cooperative Educational Services. Okay. In Texas, they are called Regional Services Centers. In California, Georgia, they're regional service agencies. In South Dakota, we call them educational cooperatives. We call them educational cooperatives. The fundamental purpose of this is to provide services that an individual district cannot efficiently or economically provide. And here it is, and this is what we call them in South Dakota, for the most part, cooperatives. Special education, vocational technical education, and again, our small schools almost exclusively function through this. It talks more down here about going together into these co-ops to provide materials, legal services, health services, all those things. The big schools like Sioux Falls does all this on their own. So that's what an intermediate unit is. State and local district, and it's a consortium of smaller ones. And this is on the test, so you'll want to know what an intermediate unit is, and what they do and what they provide. Function to collaborate and share services. And the idea behind it is you can do things more efficiently, cheaper as a bigger unit than these very, very small schools. Okay, let me push this a little farther. Then why wouldn't we get bigger? Why wouldn't we function to get like if this is good, when we go to buy materials and stuff, why wouldn't we function completely as a state then? Couldn't we buy more, let me just use this, that we don't do any more paper. I do believe paper is disappearing, but let's just say we need we're going to provide, you know, computers for each student. Wouldn't we be better off to function as a complete state unit, working with a company to buy this, than even these local intermediate units? Like a co-op? My thought anyway. Now, I want to take a minute and just look at this organizational structure. And again, if you're from a small school, this will look different. But for example, like the Sioux Falls School District and beyond, and I say this, I'm going to say in the cross-section of big schools, Sioux Falls would be a small big school. But for the most part, it starts the same, where this here, it starts at the school board, and of course their authority comes from the state legislation. Ultimate responsibility for running the school falls on the state, because that's where the federal government said the Constitution is not mentioned, so it comes to the state to run this. And that's why you see sometimes states have to go in and take over school districts that are really doing poorly. And there's a lot of examples and talk about that. But for the most part, this board has the governing. They do approve the policies. And do you remember how we get the school board? Correct, they're elected, and they work with the school, not directly, but through a superintendent. And if you're in a school where the school board is in the buildings, running the school, making decisions, you're in a bad district, and you need to not walk, but run. Because the superintendent is the person to do that. He or she is that liaison between them. And I've heard of districts, I've never worked in one, but where the board walks the halls and talks to people and makes decisions. So under this superintendent, rarely in a school the size of this one do teachers respond to the superintendent. You see the levels here, that you have these next layers called assistant superintendents, and this would be like your business manager, the HR person, curriculum instruction person, special services, and like special services, not special ed, but like bilingual ed, federal programs for poor kids, school community relationships to deal with that. And here, so you see the arrows in this one here, the assistant superintendent curriculum instruction, like curriculum directors, below them library media people fall under that, staff development, evaluation for those. But for the most part, you as the teachers will respond to the principal. The principal's the one that will run the building, not the district, the school building day to day, and worry about things like instruction and organization. And a big responsibility of the principal is scheduling. If you're in a high school with 100 kids, that's not a big deal. If you're in a high school with 3,000 or 4,000, it's a huge part of their job. And then below that principal is the teachers, and of course the pupils, and they connect to a lot of here the students. I don't really like that word pupils, but students. So like out here, a business affairs person probably never would have anything to do with the students. And HR, for the most part, does hiring and administrating things, but does not hire or fire or things like that. That they just administrate all that and make sure you're legal and all the thickness that goes with that. And then here's a whole bunch of other folks that really don't have anything to do with students for the most part. There's some special services here, but you think of, when you look at this, how many folks are on the payroll here that maybe don't work with students. And again, I want to take you to a big district like Chicago, I believe is one of the bigger ones in the country, in the United States, and how many layers and how thick this is. But that would be typical of what that looks like. So let's talk about something a little smaller maybe. This is back from the chapter what your organization of school. You have common features: classrooms, corridors, central office, cafeteria, gymnasiums, libraries, those things. Criticized for resembling an egg crate, meaning they all look a lot the same. Even in other countries, from state to state, you would walk into all schools and any place in this United States, and you would expect to see similar things. Because it's organized, self-contained. So here would be what I would say is a much smaller thing in a school. Ultimately, the principal and then assistant principals, for example, where Alex goes, my son, they have about 4 assistant principals, and then they do have these folks also. And then because of the size, they have department or team heads, or in an elementary, we'd call them grade level leaders. Because of the size, so that there's not, in a small school, you'd have this direct feed from a teacher to the principal. Teachers and single largest group of students here, or single largest group of adults are teachers. In the whole district, so no matter how big it is, the biggest group is still the teachers. And then all kinds of support staff like secretaries, media specialists, custodians, cafeteria workers, bus drivers. Here's a big one that they don't mention here is the teacher's aides. And now with special ed, and a number of reasons, we get more and more of those folks in our schools help that become a very critical part of that. So let's draw one that maybe would be more familiar. Let's just say we're in a very small school, and one that you and I are more familiar with, that you'd have your board here. It's hard to write on this. School board there, and then the next line, of course, would be that soup. And then often, if depending on the size, there may be a principal. Just say, for example, if this person is the high school, maybe an elementary principal, and then the teachers here. And this person could have like a business manager, we'll call it here. And oftentimes the district I'm familiar with, this person did the bus drivers, maybe the secretaries, aides. And when I said did that, means they evaluated them, give them their annual reviews, those types of things. But your chain of command then was much closer, that you might be the superintendent of the board. And for the most part, this is the only relationship here, as I described to you earlier. But this would be much smoother versus this look here that's in a building, or I had you in the textbook about this. And what I'm going to do, again, I'm going to give you this clip for you to submit right here in your notes. I'm going to say it's like this right here. You go, this is number 3 of this is all, and you're getting off easy this time, and this is a 9.1 from clip here, from the clips page. That in, and then also we talked about paying for services. 9.2 here also on paying for it, and this is that big part here is fully 2/3 of it goes for instruction and instruction related, and sometimes that means the teacher's aides too, but just 5% support services, and this would be things that students need. This is the one that people complain the most about, is administration costs, that fully 10%. just to administrate. And again, in a smaller school stuff, but if you're in a huge school, it often takes that many and that many levels. And I know I can remember my parents complaining about how much it cost to have these administrators around that did not teach kids, and they thought it was important that they do that. So it gives you some footnotes here, these little numbers, like number 4 says included attendance, social work, guidance, health, psych services, speech, all those things come in student services. And again, in my opinion, that's a small number. And then this operation one here in 2 says include operations and maintenance, student transportation, food, enterprise operations, those. Okay. So I'm going to clip this too, and this will be number 4.